Friends, welcome back. It's the week we've all been waiting for. It is the most anticipated college football game, perhaps of this season. Certainly now as we get into the second half of the season. Welcome to another episode of Believe in Big Ten. I'm Rhett Lewis. Great to be back here with you. And we get one of the foremost voices on college football joining us here in this episode. Analyst on Fox, he and Jason Benetti and their team with Allison Williams do a fantastic job each and every week. And we get to welcome Brock Huard to the show. Former Washington Husky, NFL vet, and now you get to see your Huskies go into Iowa City this week after a big win. Brock, welcome to the show, buddy.
Is that the game you're teeing up? Is the biggest in college football? Iowa, Washington,
no, that wasn't
Saturday
it.
morning?
That wasn't,
I know. It's going to be big.
It's close.
Okay.
Close. And we will get to that. Of course, Oregon-Ohio State is the game we are talking about. It's the game we've been talking about in this conference for some time now, since the new Big Ten was announced and the schedules came out. It was October 12th, and it was Ohio State heading to Oregon at Autzen Stadium. All the hoopla will be there, as you know, Brock. But you have seen this Oregon team twice with your crew.
Yep.
So how does Oregon stack up based on what you've seen from them in person and what you've seen from Ohio State?
Yeah, I think really well. I was telling someone the other day, our crew sometimes gets tired of some of the little gimmicks and games that I play over the course of a season. And one of the last things I do, Rhett, is I've got my board, right?
Yeah.
So I've got my player board of, in this case, Iowa, Washington, and looking at it. And at the end of it, just play the playground game. Okay, we're on the playground like we were as kids. You know, we're playing kickball, we're playing basketball at recess, whatever it is. And okay, I want you, and I'm going to pick you, and you get to pick first. And next recess, I get to pick first. And right, I mean, all that fun stuff back in the day. And I'll do that at the end. Like, okay, well, like last week with Oregon and Michigan State, I'm taking 19, 20 Ducks, and I'm taking 2 Spartans out of the 22 starters.
Yep.
And the game kind of played out that way. This week with Oregon, Ohio State, it is a really difficult, darn near close to like maybe 12-10 Ohio State.
Wow.
Maybe 13-9, 12-10, right in that range. But then you factor in Autzen Stadium, much like I would factor in the Horseshoe if this was in Columbus, and I would say that is at least a player. I mean, that voice and that sound and just, you know, that environment is at least a one-player difference. So then you get to it and you're like, yeah, this should be toe-to-toe, mano-a-mano, 2 Goliaths going at it. There's no David. Right. There's no stone being thrown.
Right.
This is just two Goliaths on the battlefield, like you said, that we've all been waiting to see.
Yeah, and you know, as a player on the last Big Ten team to go into Autzen Stadium and beat the Oregon Ducks back in 2003, I can vouch. I can vouch for that environment and that atmosphere, and it is very difficult to deal with.
Can I say this though too, Rhett?
Yes, you can.
I would say this, man. I was there before you, the previous century, like 90, 95, 96, 98. Like we, played down there twice, and it was loud. And they had the Omni turf back then, so you hardly see them on the other sidelines. Had the huge hump in the field, but from then to 2003 to 2024, it has just gotten more and more dialed in. It is so loud. They play the best music in the country in pregame. They do. I turned to Benetti before the game. I'm like, I'm not a music aficionado, but even I know Metallica, Guns N' Roses, classic CCNR. They do shout in the third quarter, and a lot of teams do, right? They have Moment of Loud at Utah. They have Jump Around in Madison, Sweet Caroline, shouts the third quarter, but they do it all game, right? After the first quarter, they play this like, I don't even know what the song is, but it moves you, and it's got all the imagery of where the Ducks have been and what they have done and the key plays through the years, and I'm just getting like the hairs on my forearm standing up. Yes. And it gets you going all game long, and that noise doesn't leave. It's not 100,000, it's not 70,000. It's like 55,000, but the sound goes up, and then it comes right back on you. That cantilevered, huge overhang, and it just, for Ohio State fans making their first trip there, it will be one they'll remember. They're going to want to win. They should, they could, they would win, but from an environment standpoint, they're going to leave there going, man, that was one hell of a show.
Yeah, and look, they remember what Oregon was all about just a couple of years ago. That's a different program now, right? Different program now with Dan Lanning leading the show. But this, there, as you mentioned, talent all over the place. You've now seen Dylan Gabriel twice. You've also seen Shedeur Sanders. How does Dylan Gabriel, in your mind, stack up to the best quarterbacks in the country?
Man, Dylan Gabriel gets the very most out of what he has. I don't know if you've ever seen him, Rhett, in person or stood by him.
We had him week 1. Yeah.
I mean, he's 5'10". Like he's going to go to the NFL draft and be, like I know they may list him at 5'11" or 6 foot, but he's going to be a whole lot closer to 5'10". He doesn't have like the biggest hands, the longest arms like a Russell Wilson has to compensate for that height, or the uber quickness that Kyler Murray has, right? Just with feet that are superhuman. Like he's maximized everything, every God-given gift or limitation in some ways compared to his peers. And I love that. I mean, he is so intentional. He's so focused. He's just a pro, and you would expect that with a guy that's likely going to break Bo Nix's all-time starts record, right? He's been around the block at 3 different places, knows what he is, knows what he isn't. It's compared to Shedeur. Yeah, Shedur's arm a lot stronger. Shedeur bigger. Shedeur, escapability even better. So, Shedeur is going to be a top prospect. Dillon's going to be a guy that will get into camp and compete, and you never know, but could also play in the CFL for like 20 years in that kind of space and anticipation and accuracy, and have a whale of a career up north as well.
Ultimately, what do you think this game hinges on? When you talk about talent, that is fairly equal. And I know we talked about home field advantage, but when you get into the matchups, like where do you see this thing kind of turning?
I hate to do this, especially as a former quarterback, because I hated it when my quarterback coach, and actually John Kitna hated it even more, and had, the spine that I didn't have when I was a rookie to just say, enough with this. Can we stop looking at this in the negative vein? Don't do this. Don't do that. Don't do this. I can't play in the don't world. Let me just be free to go create and play. And if I make a mistake, I make a mistake, but I got to move on. But honestly, Rhett, I think ultimately this one does, because they're so evenly matched. Both teams have dynamic playmakers. They're both tremendous in the perimeter. They're both going to make things happen. It's going to be probably the QB that makes the least amount of mistakes, the least amount of negative plays, right? And Dillon's had 3 awful picks in the red zone the last 2 games. And sometimes as a QB, that can be hard to flush when you get back down there in the red zone. Like, man, everything's faster. And that was a bad pick 6 at UCLA. And those were 2 worse interceptions in my own building, costing us points against Michigan State. Will Howard throws, first pick last week against Iowa in that first half. And Will Howard's not been asked to do quite as much, certainly in an environment like this, and all the pressure and all the heat and all the length. I think it was Brian Lindgren, the OC at Michigan State, who's competed against the Ducks a bunch. And I asked him last week, I said, you know these guys, right? I mean, institutional knowledge. What is it about them and Tosh and Dan that make them difficult? And he said, beyond the scheme, and the scheme is great, and they'll have an extra day to prepare, and they've got a good plan. They'll all be sound. He said, it's just their length, right? It's like that old Jim Boeheim 2-3 zone. Like, what makes the Syracuse 2-3 zone much more effective than others? Well, when they can hold hands and stretch like sideline to sideline, right?
Yes.
Like that's the length that he recruited. And Jordan Birch got length. Uyongale got length. Tuioti got length. Girth in the middle. Linebackers that can run. Yeah. This young running back, Devin Jackson, they call the Jet, one of the fastest players on the whole team, hitting 22. Yeah, 22 miles an hour. Like, that's real. And you see it now being played real. So their secondary is not as long, right? They're a little undersized at nickel and at safety and at corner. Jabbar Muhammad is so the length is a little lesser. The speed and quickness on the back end is more. But yeah, Will's going to feel like a length that will be familiar. It's spring ball. It's training camp. It's Sawyer, and it's JT. It's what I've faced that side. So he's not totally new to it. But at that speed, with that noise, it's going to be pretty enveloping.
No question. And I think that's the great point you make about the blank. I think Jordan Birch is playing, the football that everyone expected him to play, like when he got in on a college campus. Yeah. Yep. And so he's finally kind of being that guy for them.
Played angry finally. He's finally played angry.
I like Jabbar Muhammad as a cover corner. Even despite the length, but we'll see how all that matches up against Jeremiah Smith and Emeka Egbuka, and you go down the line with that Ohio State skill position group. Going to be a fun one, certainly there. Brock, of course, preparing for Washington, Iowa. Going to get into that game and some of the other matchups of this weekend in just a moment. Want to first remind you that BetOnline is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for everything football. BetOnline has every stat, every matchup, and even live odds and spreads to bet on during the games. Think you know your stuff? Get in on our $200,000 mega contest and pick 5 games against the spread every week for your chance at weekly prizes and a share of $200,000. When the game's over, head on over to our online casino and get in on a game of blackjack or poker or unwind with one of our over 150 slots games. Head to the website today to get in on the action. Bet online. The game starts here. All right, back with you on Believe in Big Ten. Brock Huard is our guest. First, want to let you know that you need to check out the melon hats. Yes, this lid on top of my head. Big fan of the melon hats. They've got one for every climate. The Hydro series, the Thermal series. They take care of your every need. So whether you're in Los Angeles at the Coliseum or out in Piscataway watching Rutgers, a hat for every season, a hat for every event. Melon has you covered. Most durable hats on the planet, built to last 5 times longer than any other hat. So if you're looking for a hat that's as tough as you, check out Melon. You won't wear anything else after you get one for yourself. Rhett Lewis, Brock Huard, back here. Let's start with the game that you are going to be covering here with your buddy Jason Benetti and Allison Williams. And you guys are headed to Iowa City. You're going to take on the Hawkeyes here. I mean, you're not going to take on the Hawkeyes, but your former your alma mater is, and they come off a big win over Michigan at home. What has Jedd Fisch done, Brock Huard, that has been so impressive here so quickly with a team that is brand new, essentially?
Yeah. I think it's been such a key for so many of the coaches, Rhett, this year, and I'm sure it's the same for you and your crew when you go on the road. It's like, man, how do you bring these guys together, right? They're not alone in this. Oregon State, we had them versus Oregon and all their new players and most of these teams, year to year, I look at these boards, I'm like, oh, great. I got these guys again. I had them last year. Where'd everybody go? And I start Googling. I'm like, well, he transferred there. He's out there. It's just amazing. One team that's not that way is Iowa.
Yep.
Iowa, they return everybody. They got 4 transfers. Jedd Fisch and UW have 23 transfers in their two deep. 23 in their 2 deep. Iowa's got 4 in their 2 deep. It's Jedd has done what a lot of these guys are striving to do, and that's bring the group together. I was out there in training camp, and I remember watching practice. And I'm like, man, it feels like a little bit of over exuberation. I don't even know if that's a word, but over celebration. You just completed a nice play, but why are we celebrating like we just won the Super Bowl? And it was pretty astute. Jedd said afterwards, he said, I'm really trying to bring this crew together because in the spring we were not. In the spring, you could walk in, and in fact, he tore down their team meeting room, that was nicely done, I thought, just a few years ago, tore that down because he wanted it to be just a player lounge. The meeting room will meet back where I did in the 90s, up the tunnel.
Really?
Yeah. So the team meeting room is going to be back up the tunnel. We're going to meet in there, but I want a locker room. I want a lounge. I want these guys hanging. I don't want them leaving. I want them all spending time together. And, he said in the spring, it was pretty obvious. There was a faction over there of the Arizona guys, the 11 transfers. There's a faction over there of the guys that stuck around. There's a faction over here of the pieces that we brought in from different places. And it was just like a bunch of different, survivor tribes. It wasn't just one family. Right. And so part of that over celebration was, no. Celebrate your teammates. We're no longer Arizona. We're no longer Washington. We're no longer transfers. We are UW, and we've got to bring this thing together. And that was an emphasis of his. And I think over the course of the season, obviously culminating last Saturday night in a huge win for them, you started to see them, and you have, right, started to see them be Washington and not a team that beats Washington, which unfortunately they were against Wazoo with 16 penalties, and they were at Rutgers with just key critical mistakes at the wrong times.
I know you'll love this. I don't know how big you are in analytics, but Bill Conley of SP Plus said that was the second most unlikely loss from a team this season. 97% of teams who play that way and put up that kind of production Washington did against Rutgers win the game.
Yeah,
it was that crazy.
Yeah.
But getting back to this game against Michigan, because I thought there was one aspect of this that was important down the stretch. There's a toughness element. Right. Yes. And the fact that they were able to run the football in a couple of key spots at the end, Brock, against, a tandem of D tackles that's better than anybody in the league. Awesome. What does that tell you about, how this team is being built?
Yeah. And if you watch it, Rhett, you watch a game tape of that. I watched it live, on TV, and I thought that's pretty good. And you watch a game tape, and it was these O-line coaches, it's a Jim Harbaugh-ism, but they love to use that word strain.
Yeah.
We're going to strain for every last little inch. And you know what? That Husky offensive line had to strain. They were not blowing those guys off the ball. You can't. Washington's O-line, left to right, transfer from Iowa Western Community College. A kid that's been a backup, been injured in the program. A transfer from Portland State. A transfer from Ohio State that really never played there, Enoch Vimahi, and then a transfer from San Diego State. San Diego State, Portland State, Iowa Western against those freak shows. And, they did. They just laid it all on the line. They just gave everything that they had. And in some cases, it was simply to be a human shield, right? Just throw your body in there, man. And then let Jonah Coleman, who is a freak. I mean, I don't know how you tackle that guy, right? I mean, he's 5'9", 220. He's I think probably closer to 5'7" and a half, 229 pounds. And then when he gets low and down, he's like, I was telling our production crew, I may need the clip from the Spartans where they all put the dome on each other, right? And the shields.
The 300.
Yes, the 300 movie, because that's what he's like. Like, how do you hit him? How do you damage him? How do you get him to the ground? And so they just got in the way enough and let him get going. He had a beautiful run after the fumble, the cutback, and just slashed. And he's averaging 100 yards a game. I mean, he's not Caleb Johnson, and he's not Ashton Genty, and he's not the kid out of Rutgers, but pretty darn good. He's not far behind, and they're going to need him to be a battering ram, and he's going to be running into a lot of collisions on Saturday morning.
Yeah, maybe a more traditional Big Ten type of matchup than you would have thought of when you saw this on paper, a couple months ago when this schedule did eventually come out. On Iowa here, on the flip side there, Brock, they're right there, right? They're always going to be in the conversation. But at some point, does the limitation on offense continue to limit their ultimate potential for upward mobility?
You can check me on this, and you can reach out to your analytics guy, because Benetti said it in passing early in the week. On Monday, we get together as a crew to review our game Saturday, what we like, what we didn't like, and then kind of preview this week. So it's kind of our first little look at that. And I want to say Benetti said something like it's somewhere between 5 and 8 passes of over 20 air yards the entire season for Iowa.
Completed or attempted?
Just attempted.
Yeah,
just attempted, not completed. Just attempted. It's somewhere between 5 and 8 attempted. We haven't played one game or two. We played 5 games. So you're like one air pass of over 20 yards attempted. I mean, per game, that's hard. That's hard to fathom, and it's totally unsustainable. Yeah. And it speaks to Caleb Johnson's greatness that he overcomes it. Their O-line is just big and heavyweights and comes right at you. Lachey is a solid tight end. Cade played as good a first half as you can possibly play in that game from what they asked him to do. The ball was out, it was on time, converted third down, and did so with anticipation and accuracy, and was awesome. But when you don't threaten, when all you do is jab, and even though those jabs can be successful, and you can have the second leading rusher in college football with jab, and I'll stick that jab and I'll bloody your nose. Right. You have to have a haymaker. That defense has to know in their back pocket at any time is a haymaker. And if you don't, it's going to be really, really hard to beat the Penn States, the Ohio States, upper tier of this. You can beat, Wisconsin and Minnesota, and maybe in Washington, they're favored to beat. You could beat them, but to beat the true heavyweights, you've got to have a little bit more punch.
Yeah, you sure do. Washington and Iowa going to be a great one. Jason Minetti, Brock Huard on the call. Looking forward to that for sure from Iowa City. I mean, these Washington Huskies, because our next guest is Bill Conley of SP Plus. I mean, they're right there, top 20 in the SP Plus model. Yes. I mean, it's
Belichick. I'd be remiss to leave our conversation. It's fun seeing you too, Rhett. You're doing a great job. Buddy. And by the way, can that hat fit a 5-head? What's it called?
Yeah. You could.
You could. The melon?
Yeah, I'll get you one. I'll send you one.
Oh, why don't you send me one and tell
them
that
I believe in Big Ten.
Tell them that I live in Colorado, a lot of sunshine, so the weather is not a factor. But the 5-head, I need something to really fit this.
This is a nice high crown right here.
Okay,
on me,
good,
so
perfect.
We got you. Yeah,
we'll make it work. But I would be remiss if we left this conversation without mentioning Steve Belichick. I was looking at the numbers, their defensive numbers, and why your buddy loves them so much, and why he's got in the top 20. They're number 3 in the country in pass defense. They're number 1 in pass efficiency deep. Now, this may not come to life versus Iowa, but it will versus,
Right.
SC and Oregon and some of these other teams. What he is doing week to week and series to series and game to game is just, it's been awesome. It's bringing the NFL, Belichick in. You never know what I'm going to do. You're going to see things you've never seen. I'm going to morph, and my methodologies will change week to week. The principles won't. We'll play good, hard, sound football, but the methodologies change, and he's done just a tremendous job because, again, they had one defensive starter return. Well, kind of 1.5. Carson Bruner started half the year, and Tupatala the other one. That's it. And your D lines, Montana State and Sac State, and you're you're making the most of what you got. And I would say, you asked earlier about Jed. I'd say through 6 games they should be 5-1. Either Wazoo or Rutgers, you got to win that. They should be 5-1. But to this point, you can't say with Belichick and Carroll and Fish, they've not gotten the most out of what they have. They've really maximized a lot of it. It's just making sure they don't have to play Washington along with their opponent.
Right.
When they've done that, they've been a hard out.
Oh, there you go. That defense has certainly been a big piece of the success thus far, and we'll see if they can keep Caleb Johnson under wraps against the Hawkeyes this weekend. All right, noon Eastern, 11 a.m. Central there in Iowa City, buddy. Enjoy the early wake up. Brock Huard with us here on Believe in Big Ten when we come back. Bill Conley joining us with his look on Oregon and Ohio State and playoff viability in the Big Ten. That's next.